Are you struggling in Outriders since patch 1.04? Are you dying constantly in high CTs or even medium CTs? Is the nerf slash fix to emergency stance really cramping your style? Well, the good news is I have solutions for you guys. In this video, I'm going to tell you how you can become more powerful than you were before patch 1.04 without glitches, without taking advantage of any broken content. You're not going to die. I'm going to teach you all about this in this video. Also, for the new players out there, I'm going to explain exactly what armor stats are all about, what resistance really means, and why they are important to you as you level up. So for all those details, guys, make sure to stay after the break. And if you're enjoying this content and like to see more, make sure to do all the simple things in life, like leaving a like. With that being said, guys, let's jump right into the video. Okay, I want to start out by going over some basics when it comes to explaining to you how the defense mechanics in this game works. I think the problem with this game initially was that it promotes such offense first gameplay about speed that people forget about defense. And now that some of the crutches of emergency stance, now that they're gone, people are dying and they don't understand quite why. So let's take a look, first of all, at the character stats screen. And I'm going to explain to you how these mechanics work. All right, so there are two main mechanics when it comes to defense in Outriders. One of them is called physical damage reduction, and the other one is resistance. Now, the only thing you normally see on armor is going to be base armor stats, okay? You don't ever see resistances on gear. The only way you're going to see resistances are going to be in your skill trees, and then based off certain mods. And we'll go over resistance in just a moment. But let's start with armor. What does armor do? Armor, basically, the only thing it impacts is a scaling percentage-based mitigation to physical damage with diminishing returns. And it's not a linear progression, meaning the higher your armor gets, it's gonna initially give you a really good value for your point. Eventually, you could get an extra 50,000 and it's not gonna do that much. So let me give you an example of what I am myself. So on my current build, on a very tanky Technomancer build, I sit around base without any buffs out at 168,000 armor. This will, for example, give me 76.6% physical medication. This is a ton. Once you get into the low to mid 70s, you're kind of peaking your performance. If I were to go to 200K, it wouldn't be that much dramatically more. Now, to give you an example, let me kind of show you what happens when I unspec my character, so I lose roughly 60% armor. And we'll see what happens to this mitigation. So remember, right now of 168K, I'm at 76.6% mitigation. So of all the physical damage I take, 76.6% of it gets taken away. Okay, guys, so now I've unspec'd, and you'll notice I am down to 105K armor, okay? But look at my physical damage reduction. I'm only down to 67.2. So I basically lost, 81,000 armor, almost half my armor. And I only lost, we were at 9% mitigation. Now, don't get me wrong, an extra 10% mitigation or so is worth it. And so I like to aim for 72 to 75% mitigation when I can. In this build in particular, this is just a number that it turned out to be based off the gear I have and the specific mod I have. But I wouldn't lose sleep if I was down at about 140, 150. My point is, once you get above about 120, 125 or more thousand, you're going to start seeing more and more diminishing returns. And I've heard people saying, oh, I've got 200K, armor, but you look at their mitigation and it isn't that much higher. So this is not where you're going to see the majority of problems of dying. You may have really high armor, but then you may notice, hey, I'm still dying. What's going on? And I'm going to tell you what's going on right now. So if you're an average player that's just been playing for a while, what I want you to do right now is go in your game and open up your stat sheet like this and tell me what your resistance says, your number. I'm going to take a wild guess, and most likely it'll say zero, maybe 10%, maybe 20. But this is a stat that is often overlooked because, again, it doesn't naturally roll on armor. But if you mouse over it, you're going to see why this is important. It says resistance, the protection provides you by gear against anomaly attacks and status damage. This is important because monsters work the same way as we do. So, our gun bullets, for example, baseline, do physical damage and are mitigated by armor unless you have armor penetration. But anomaly damage, so our skills, for example, like the dots, the flame, the toxic damage, etc., it's all anomaly damage. It bypasses armor. So I could have 300,000 armor and it could say 80% physical damage reduction. That goes through it like this. So if you're gonna fight the brood mothers, and you have the other elites, and you notice they do those like AoE attacks where the lightning goes on the ground, that is all anomaly damage. And if you're wondering, wait, Leeroy, I have all this armor. Why am I getting one shot or two shot? Well, that's because it's bypassing all your armor. Your armor means nothing. So this is where resistance comes into play. You need to get this buffed. Now, you may have seen right before I respec, I had 50% mitigation. Now I'm going to respec right now in a moment, and I'm going to basically show you what happens once I buff up for combat. And with the build I'm going to explain to you with the specific mods, you're going to be able to have this uptime 100% of the time with most builds. Caveat, most builds. I'll explain why in just a moment. Okay, guys, I'm back, and now I've basically respec, and I've also enabled the procs off my mod that I use currently. And this is a mod that on my build, I can keep up 100% of the time. Let's look at my numbers. I am now at 76.6% physical mitigation as I was before, but now I have 95% resistance. Basically, I am immune for the most part to anomaly damage. Those same attacks on CT15 that were one-shotting or two-shotting me, now I can sit there and laugh and it just tickles. So the good news is you can do this as well. This is not an exploit and it is doable in most situations. So let's go ahead now and take a look at the different mods. We're going to compare to what emergency stance was and now what the replacement mods are going to be that you're going to want to take a look at. Okay, guys, before we look into the future, let's look into the past. So for those that were uninitiated, why you felt so godly before, maybe you knew about this kind of bug, maybe you didn't. But what was keeping us before 1.04, basically invincible, was emergency stance. So if you take a look at this mod, it says attain golem protection effect for 4 seconds whenever your health drops below 30%, 10-second cooldown. What golem effect is that it did a 65% damage mitigation. It is a flat damage mitigation. Those are super powerful because it's not just physical, but also it's physical as well as anomaly damage, so all damage. And the bug was that it would proc once, and even though the buff icon would disappear, the effect would last forever. So in addition to your armor, you would have a 65% damage mitigation, which basically capped you out in most circumstances, and you would be nigh invincible. The patch came out, and all they did, the main thing they did, was they got rid of that bug, and so now it only procs for 4 seconds every 10 seconds. So even under optimal circumstances, you could have like a 40% uptime, but in reality, that's not quite how it works out. So the point is, this is no longer completely broken, but it is not useless. So in some cases, as I will discuss in just a moment, this may still be your best in slot if you have a specific type of build. So wait till later in the video to hear about that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the goal of building high survivability. So as you saw earlier in the video, it's all about hitting a certain threshold of your armor. And then after that, it's all about resistances. Now, it's much easier to get armor in this game than resistances. And most people have been neglecting resistances. So we're going to want to make sure that we put enough energy and attention to resistances. Now, if you have a class like the Technomancer, for example, or the Devastator, where you are actively using within your build percentage increases to armor. So, for example, if you go middle tree on Technomancer, you could easily pick up 40 or 60% mitigation. That plus just level 50 gear is going to get you pretty close to capping out your armor, just like that. You'll get into the high 60s, for example. Then at that point, you could get a very simple mod that I'm going to recommend right now to cap you off effectively for armor, where you will not need any armor, and then help your resistances. So let's take a look at that mod right now. So the first mod in question that I want to bring to light, and it's one that people used to use in the past, and then they kind of fell out of favor, is called Damage Absorber. Now, what I like about this is it doesn't matter on your playstyle. This is passive. This is active at all times. It's tier 2. This is important. This means it can innately roll on your gear. And why this is important is that means you can roll this on your piece of gear, and then the other slot is the one that you can modify. Unlike tier 3 mods that we'll take a look at in a moment, where they cannot naturally roll on your gear. So you're either going to have to get the legendary associated with that piece of gear, or you're going to have to sacrifice your moddable slot on your gear. And that's an important thing when it comes to controlling min-maxing your gear. So here, you're going to see at level 50, you get a little bit under 53,000 armor and 10% resistances. That 10% resistance is huge. Again, if you were to have a build that has at least 40% armor percentage buff from skill tree, this is all you need. If you don't, if you have a glass cannon build and you don't have those modifiers, you may need option B, which we'll look at in just a second. Because again, that 60% on this case is going to give this another 27,000. So in reality, this mod itself, if you have a 60% damage modifier, is going to be worth closer to 70 to 80,000 armor. That's all you need. But if you're going kind of a glass cannon, you may need option number 2 for armor potentially. Now, mod number 2 option is also tier 2, which again, the benefit of this is that it can roll naturally on your like epic gear, for example. So that's very, very important. But there's a caveat on when you can use this. So it is called mitigation from death. It's been popular off and on in the past, and it states killing enemies while aiming down sight grants 45,638, that's at level 50, points of armor for 10 seconds, stacks up to 3 times. So the key here is you have to be killing enemies while aiming down sights. So the reason I say this is situational is if you play an anomaly build, like a turret build, or maybe you play a pyromancer or devastator, that's all about their skills. You may not necessarily be using your guns. You may not be aiming down. You may be basically killing things through AoE. And those skills, when you kill things with those skills, does not count as killing enemies while aiming down sights. So if you happen to be aiming down sights and you're killing things, that's a different story. But the point is, it's a little harder to upkeep in that situation. Or let's say you're doing moaning wind spam. In that case, you're just spamming those mods and you're not really aiming or shooting that much. So in those cases, this may not proc as much. And if you're not keeping at least 2 stacks of this up, it's not cost effective. Because if you're only keeping 1 stack up, or worse, 0, then you're going to want to go with that first option we looked at a moment ago. But if you're playing a gun-based build or a hybrid build where you are still shooting things and you're still killing things with your guns, then mitigation from death is great, especially if you do not have any passive percentile bonuses. Because let's say, as I mentioned before, you had plus 40 or plus 60% to your armor in your skill tree. That's overkill for this. That would mean you get about 70-some thousand armor per stack. You do not need 210,000 armor on top of your armor that comes with your gear. That is overkill. You're going to hit huge diminishing returns. So again, if you're built with skill percentage or armor percentage buffs into your build, do not use this. It is not cost effective. At the very least, go ahead and go back to using Damage Absorber as mentioned previously. Now, in my humble opinion, the new meta mod for survival in CT15s, which is going to again revolve around surviving anomaly damage, is all going to be about this very specific mod, Circle of Power. Now, it is tier 3, meaning you have to mod into it by custom, or you got to have the legendary that it comes with. So that's the big caveat. Now, let's look at the writing. It says, boost your resistance by 15% every time you use a skill, stacks up to 3 times, and deteriorates every 7 seconds. So the caveat here is you need a build where you can spam abilities. So, for example, with Technomancer, if you're doing a scrap grenade build, where you can basically spam your scrap grenade 6 times in a row, up to 6 times, before cooldown, you get this up as much as you want. If you're doing a turret build for Technomancer, also you're spamming abilities constantly, so you can keep this up. But if you happen to have a build, like let's say the Blight round build, which doesn't spam things as much because you get your Blight turrets, you'll sometimes maybe drop an AoE crowd control, and then you're only spamming your turret every 7 or so seconds. You may actually struggle to keep all 3 stacks on this. If you cannot consistently, at the very least, keep 2 stacks of this, it is not worth it. If you're only showing that you're stacking one most of the time, that means you're getting 50% mitigation resistances only on average. You want to go one of the earlier options for resistances. Um, but if you can get 2 or 3 of these stacks, it is worth every bit of this mod. This is what I use. I'm able, with my build, to constantly be spamming abilities. I get 50% resistances between my first mod and my skill tree. I add this 45% up, and I am running 95% of the time plus with 95% anomaly resistance, and it makes me almost immune to damage, combined with a decently high armor rating. So this is the new meta mod, as long as you can meet that criteria that you are spamming abilities. If not, then you're going to have to look at the other alternative. Okay, guys. So, what if you're in that scenario where you don't meet either of the criteria I just mentioned? So, you are not really spamming skills anymore, unfortunately. And let's say even, and you also, your build does not have, you're not taking any of the skill nodes that give you flat resistances. So, you're struggling with stacking resistances. So, now you're in a real pickle initially, because even if you get your armor up, you're still going to feel squishy in at least half the situations of the game. So at this point, you go up to option 3, and this is going to give you where a situation where 2 mods are going to be viable. And this is also where I put that caveat at the beginning of the video that emergency stance may still potentially, in certain circumstances, be a really good option for you. So we're going to look at 2 mods that are going to be viable at this point. Okay, so let's take a look at those. So the very first mod we're going to look at is called Perseverance Shield. It is also a tier 2 mod. Again, key point here, because it's tier 2, you can pre-roll it on your gear, and so you don't have to mod into it, which is key. And it says receive 8,875 points of shield whenever your health drops below 30%. There's a 5-second cooldown. Now, I've had people say, oh, that's not, I mean, that's 9,000, that's like a third of my health. Why is this a big deal? Well, this competes with emergency stance. And if you have very low resistances, this may be viable. In fact, if you have 0 resistances, you may end up spending 2 different time slots on defensive items, which again is picking 2 out of your 10 slots is what I maximum recommend for allocation for defense. The other 8 should be offense. And if you're pushing it, you can go to 9 offense, 1 defense, but never go more than 2. So if you're in the scenario that I just mentioned, where you're kind of stuck with getting 0 resistances from your gear and other mods and skill trees, this is the first item you're going to want to look at. And the reason is because the shield mitigates from both anomaly as well as physical mitigation. So it is more effective than an armor proc. So it's going to help you survive those big hits that come after getting dropped to below 30%. So there's going to be that period of time where you need to heal back up. This is going to give you that grace period that hopefully you don't get 2 shot. If you get 1 shot, nothing you can do because you get below 30 and you die. But if you were to get 2 shots, this is going to help you. Also, notice it's only a 5-second cooldown. This is a big, big thing when it comes to comparing it to Golem, the emergency stance mod. Now let's take a look at that mod again one more time. So here we have emergency stance. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, the strength of this mod, even after being fixed, is the fact that it procs a 65% overall mitigation against damage, so physical and anomaly damage. And as you've learned from watching this video, those get mitigated by different stats. So In theory, as long as you're not face tanking, this can proc every 10 seconds for 4 seconds. And during those periods, you're pretty safe. The problem is you're not going to keep track when it's up or down. So if it drops and then all of a sudden you get hit again, that doesn't proc, then you get two shot and you die. So what I recommend is if you are in that horrible scenario where you get absolutely no resistances from your gear, for example, and you also don't have spammable abilities, so you can use the tier 3 mod we discussed, then the combination you would want to go to keep yourself as tanky as possible is actually going to be emergency stance plus the perseverance shield. So yes, they're going to be situational, but one's going to be up every 5 seconds, the other one every 10 seconds. So for every 10 seconds, you can have two perseverance shields proccing. So one of them should cover you if you basically get hit really hard again before your emergency stance procs again. Now, this combination I only recommend in that special circumstance. If you're able to get armor percentage increases on your build, if you can get resistances on your build, if you can spam abilities, then you can go for the previous options that I mentioned and combo them however you see fit to get to that armor level to where your physical mitigation is around that 72 to 75% or so. And then try and get your resistances at the very least to about 50%. I showed you how I got 95% through between my build as well as the mods. So if you again min max the mods, you can become basically almost immune to anomaly damage. So hope that information helps you. You are now well equipped for 1.04 and beyond. And if you want to see more content like this, remember, like, subscribe, and come and check me out on my Twitch stream, which is on Leeroy Gaming Stream. 6 days a week now, between mornings and evenings, I'm doing free runs for followers. We also stream it simultaneously through YouTube and Facebook Gaming, so you can check me out. Come on board, sign up, get free runs, get free legendaries. It's a great community. Join the Discord, all that good stuff. Hope to see you there in the next video. This is Leeroy from Leeroy Gaming. See you guys.